Hello, this is Joseph Gillette Sr. with Global Intel Hub coming at you for another episode of Intelligence Storm, which is a podcast where we interview key people, witnesses, whistleblowers, people who have something interesting to discuss. And this last guest was absolutely the best one. It's John Perkins, the famous economic hitman. For those of you who are not familiar with John Perkins, this is a great podcast to start with. And you can get his books and everything at johnperkins.org. They're absolutely must-reads, whether you're in the financial services sector or not. It is just a fascinating account where he did work for the CIA as an economic hitman, where he would basically give countries loans that they very well knew that could not be repaid. And so then they would take the resources, whether that was bananas or oil or whatever resources that the agency wanted. And it also showcases how the intelligence apparatus in the United States is actually more of a business than it is gathering intelligence against enemies, for example. And a few things really shocked me, and the biggest thing that shocked me was his connection to shamanism. And this happened to him actually before he was an economic hitman. He was living in the jungle of the Amazon, basically, in South America. I'm not sure if it was Mexico or South America, with the Mayan people, and these were tribal people, and he almost died, and a shaman saved his life, and he really has some high level of spiritual awareness, which makes me wonder, are people like this chosen for professions like this because they're like that, and the CIA wants to use their spiritual ethereal powers for their agenda? Or do you discover these abilities and do they encourage these abilities while you're there? Or is it a combination of both? In any case, John Perkins is a very sincere, heartfelt intellectual that wants to bring about what he calls a life economy versus a death economy. And it's almost like he took this intelligentism, which is an idea that we've been working on as far as a free and fair open market system, which is a capitalism 2.0, or a hybrid capitalism. That means something that you have kind of the best of both worlds. You have free markets, but you also have the incentive to trade and the incentive to make business, because it's really startups and small businesses that make the economy grow. And he seemed to be on the same page, but from kind of a deeper spiritual perspective, talking about how it's a life economy. And that fits into our philosophy, which is you've got kind of two ways to go about business. One is like the venture capital approach, where you invest in something and it grows, like investing in an orchard, where you buy a bunch of trees and every year they bear fruit. That's kind of a positive, or as John says, a life economy. Then you have a death economy, which is basically like the war business. No matter how you feel about war, the only victors you have in war are victims. You don't have any real winners in war, except, of course, the companies that sell the bombs and sell the munitions. That's a death economy or a destructive economy. And the whole point is, with a destructive economy, that's kind of, in the business sense, that's the Gordon Gekko. You come in, you buy a company, you break it up, you fire everyone, because any company is worth more if you sell it for its parts. Just take a car. If you've ever been to a used car lot or a junk car lot, you can buy a window or a steering wheel for a 1985 Ford for $50, $100 if you need it, because it's the only wheel that's going to fit. So if you calculate how much a car is worth, if you break it up, it's going to be significantly more than what the car is worth. And that's the thinking of the death economy. They want to maximize their profit by destroying things, breaking things up, bombing countries. And the problem with that mentality is you always need a new country to bomb. Once you take the car apart, you can't use the car. If we're looking at our guns and butter analogy, guns being the tools of the economy and butter being consumables. It's actually a really bad example, but that's what they teach in economics class. In the guns and butter analogy, when you have something like a gun, you can use it. I think the car is a better analogy. You can use a car to transport, to haul equipment, to take people from point A to point B. Once you dismantle that car and sell it, it's useless. So in the life economy, what John is promoting everything you do has positive ripple effects that it kind of creates outward momentum in outside, and it can create even new industries. Like if you look at a company like SpaceX, on the surface they're just selling rockets, but what's happening is they're creating other industries like in space manufacturing, like space transportation, like space mining, asteroid mining, mining on the moon, space, different engineering that you can only do in space. So what happens with the life economy, you create, and those creations is like it's like little civilizations that are constantly growing and growing and growing. And so we really agreed on a lot, although from a different perspective. So I was really shocked about that, and I wasn't aware of that side of him, which was a real positive surprise. So let's dive right in, and you can see for yourself. Let's see what he had to say. Hello, John. Welcome to Intelligence Storm. How are you doing?
Good, Joseph. Nice to be with you.
Nice to meet you and nice to have you. For those who don't know you, could you just give a small background of where you've been and how you came to be an author and just a summary of your story?
Well, for a number of years back in the 70s, I was chief economist at a major U.S. consulting firm. But really, what I was an economic hitman. And if you want more details about that, we can get into it. But uh, my job was to basically spread American imperialism, if you want to call it that. And I was pretty good at the job. But eventually, my conscience got the better of me. I got out, and I'd been a Peace Corps volunteer deep in the Amazon before that. And when I graduated from business school, before I went into the business, I took 3 years off, basically to avoid the Vietnam War, which I didn't believe in, and we spent that time deep in the Amazon rainforest. So at some point, I began writing books about the Amazon and indigenous people. I went back there after I quit being an economic hitman. I went back and reconnected with these people, indigenous people called the Shuar people, deep, deep, deep in the Amazon, to help them save their forests, and created a nonprofit called Dream Change that eventually sort of shapeshifted into the Pachamama Alliance, which now is quite well known around the world. And I began writing books about indigenous people and shamanism. And eventually I decided I had to write about what I'd done as an economic hitman. And there's a long story behind that, how I was discouraged from doing that originally. My life was threatened. And I don't know how much detail you want me to get into, but uh, eventually I did, after 9/11, write this book called Confessions of an Economic Hitman, which has sold millions of copies in 38 languages. Been on the New York Times bestseller list for about a year and a half. It did very, very well. And it then reawakened an interest in my shamanic books too, my indigenous books. And since then, I've written four other books on global economics. I think 5 books on global economics, economic hitman, and 5 books on shamanism, and one book called Touching the Jaguar, which kind of makes a bridge between the two, because I see these two fields, despite the fact that most everybody else sees them as two very, very diverse subjects. I see them as having a great deal of similarity.
Are you saying that there's similarity between economics and the shamanism?
Absolutely, uh,
Yeah.
because both are based on perception. So when I was a Peace Corps volunteer, my life was saved by a shaman. I was actually dying, physically dying, and he saved my life and then asked that I become his apprentice. And one of the things that I learned and how he saved my life really was teaching me. In one night, it just happened to be with ayahuasca, which now has become quite popular throughout the world. But in those days, this is 1969, I'd never heard of it. I didn't know anybody that ever heard of it except them, the people in the Amazon. In any case, afterwards, he asked me to be his apprentice, which I did. And one of the most important things he taught me was that reality is molded by perception. So, however we perceive things influences our actions, and those influence reality. And the same is true in marketing. The same is true in business. It's all about creating perception. The same is true in politics, in
Yeah.
media. The world, the human world, really is controlled by perceptions. And if we want to change things, so these days I'm on a constant tour or podcast writing about how we need to transform a degenerative economic system that economists call a death economy that's consuming and polluting itself into extinction into a life economy that will create a much better long-term future for us. And that's all can be done through perception because both of those situations, both of those economies the result of our perceptions of what it means to be successful.
How do we do that? That's a great thought. But I mean, the powers that the establishment that controls markets and owns all the assets invests a lot of money in creating perceptions that cause people to react in ways that they want. So how do you fight against that?
Yeah, well, who buys the products? Who buys into the investments? Who supports the companies and the billionaires who are making these investments? And who justifies them on the means that, well, they're contributing a lot to society, they're contributing a lot to philanthropy. Whatever we do, we are under a perception that there's a side of that that's good. I mean, and I'm not talking about you or me personally or any of your listeners, but there's a general belief amongst us today that success is measured by dollars. If you are not happy with your life, make a few more dollars and you'll be happy. You don't have to become a billionaire, but if you get a bigger house, you can have a better car, or whatever it is. And in some parts of the world, it's simply having enough money to feed your children. So success is all our definition of success. Our perception of success is molded by our perception of what it means to have money, essentially. We even measure our sports heroes by how much money they make. You know, During a season, it may be about how many passes the quarterback has thrown, but ultimately, it's well, what was his last contract compared to the new guy that's coming on who's just been paid $100 million, in his contract, and it goes on like that. So that's the measure of success, but that's only a perception of what it means to be successful. In the indigenous cultures where I still spend a lot of time. I take groups deep into the Amazon and to the Mayan people of Guatemala every year.
Really?
Yeah.
That's awesome.
Yeah, it's great. I love doing it. And, if any of your listeners want to come, go to johnperkins.org and the itineraries are there. But, these indigenous cultures have never measured success by their materialism. Success is
Yeah.
measured in many ways, what they contribute to the community, what kind of a person they are, so that sort of thing.
Yeah, yeah, we have a society and system that encourages greed and hoarding and lots of bad things. And if you're
Yeah,
an athlete or an actor, you're a hero and you get billions of dollars. But if you're a teacher or someone trying to do good, you're going to get it's just problems for you. And
yeah. So
yeah,
the difference between that is the difference between a death economy and a life economy. The death economy basically has the goal of increasing materialistic consumption for individuals, increasing short-term profits, maximizing short-term profits for corporations. And that's a terrible, terrible goal. And it is taking us down a road toward self-destruction, toward, you know, uh, extreme consumerism and extreme pollution that ultimately is leading to huge crises around the world. The life economy, on the other hand, has a goal of maximizing long-term benefits for life, for human life and all life, because what's human life without the trees and the cats and dogs and all the other animals?
yeah, I totally agree. And I want to also include your thoughts on Bitcoin because I agree about that. We were talking before we started that. Do you think Bitcoin or cryptocurrency is a solution like you're presenting, or it's not?
It's really, really funny, Joseph, that I was asked to speak at this big Bitcoin conference in Las Vegas a couple of months ago. I was on the main stage. I was one of the few people that was on the main stage as a single speaker. I had a host, so there were two of us there, but most of it was panels. But one of the other people that was speaking on the same stage by himself was J.D. Vance, and also well, the two Trump brothers were also there, and it was fascinating for me to be invited to this. And I'm like, well, I don't know. When they invited me, I said, I don't know anything about Bitcoin. I don't think I like it. Why are you inviting me? And they said, well, we want you to talk about this transition from a death economy to a life economy because we think Bitcoin can participate in that. And I began to do some research. I was very skeptical. And then when I got to the conference, I met some fascinating people that were very involved. And, this was a conference of 35,000 people in Las Vegas in the Venetian Hotel, which is a trip in itself. And now I'm headed in a month or so to Nashville, Tennessee, not too far from you, to do a little Bitcoin group there. And again, if people want to attend any of these things, it's on my website at johnperkins.org. Um, and that conference in Nashville is particularly oriented toward how Bitcoin can contribute to human rights around the world. And so there's this whole movement within the larger Bitcoin movement of using Bitcoin to enhance environmental issues, to make the environment better, to level out peak demand for energy, to promote solar and wind, which they are doing, and to provide a way where people who live in very oppressive governments, Russia, Iran, other places can transfer money without government interference using Bitcoin, where remittances, people who work from, the Mexicans who work in the United States can send money back home more easily. So there's a very beneficial side, I think. But there's also, to me, there's a great threat that Bitcoin can be controlled by a new type of oligarchy. We may get rid of the central bank, Federal Reserve oligarchy and fall into the hands of a new type of oligarchy. I really don't know. I have to say I'm still in the process of trying to figure all of this out. I do believe that blockchain and the idea of crypto has a lot of validity that we need to look into because we definitely need an alternative to the dollar, to the fiat system, the central banking system that we have in the United States. It just gives too damn much power to a small group of people who can be controlled by the president, as we're seeing the conflict between the current president of the United States and the head of the Fed, chairman of the Fed.
Yeah, people don't understand how the financial system works. That was my Achilles heel when I was a currency trader. Is when I tell them I'm a currency trader or I trade forex, they look at me like I have a rare disease. They don't. And so I wrote a book, and there's an education factor, but the central banks control the whole system. There's no. It's not really a free market when they can set the interest rate, set M3, control the Fed funds rate, all the different like how much money they need for deposit, the wholesale rate, everything,
Yeah.
money in,
And,
money out.
a major difference, a very simplified view of the difference between the dollar and Bitcoin is that the dollar is essentially controlled by supply. So the Fed,
Right.
controls supply by raising and lowering interest rates, et cetera. Uh, whereas Bitcoin is really controlled by demand. The price
Yeah.
price goes up or down depending on demand. And right now, Bitcoin is ranked, I think, is either the fourth or fifth largest corporation, if you call it a corporation. It's not, but if you were to consider it, that it's worth about, I think, between $3 and $4 trillion, which is it just replaced Google as I think the fifth largest capital asset
Yeah.
valuation. So I think one of the important things for us to understand is that it is a very, very strong influence in the world. And whether you like it or not, it's something to try to understand uh, if you want to understand the way world economics works, because it is playing a major role in world economics today, like it or not.
Yeah. Do you think there are people like what you did in the 70s that are kind of modern versions of your job? Are they still active, or is it kind of a, or is it shifted towards more of a technological, or you don't know? I mean, do you think
Oh,
that it's
yeah, absolutely. And when I was an economic hitman, we were basically generic. My job was to identify countries with resources our corporations wanted, like oil, and then arrange a huge loan, World Bank or one of its sister organizations loan to that country. But the loan had to be used to hire U.S. corporations to build big infrastructure projects in that country, like
yeah,
power, like power plants, highways, ports, airports, things that ultimately helped the very rich who own the industries, who own the businesses, and actually hurt the majority of the people. But the statistics would show that, in fact, we were helping everyone because it raised, when you build these infrastructure projects, that raises GDP, gross domestic product. And gross domestic product per capita is used to indicate how prosperous everybody in the country is doing. But that's a lie because gross domestic product really measures how well the rich are doing and the big corporations are doing, as you well know. And per capita, simply you divide that number by the population and you say, well, that's how everybody's doing. But that's not true. But I believed that for many years because that's what I've been taught in business school. So I thought I was doing a really good thing. And then over time, I began to see that I was lying to the world and to myself. Uh, but so these still the people doing that job, and incidentally, and then once the country has this loan and can't repay it, then we go back in, usually in the guise of the International Monetary Fund, and say, hey, we'll help you refinance, but you have to meet these conditionalities. And one of those is sell your oil real cheap to our oil companies without any
yeah,
environmental or social regulations, or let us build a military base on your soil, and so on. And so that still happens. Yes, absolutely. And in fact, now the China's economic hitmen are doing a much better job than we ever did. They've got a better marketing tool. I can go into that in detail if you want. That was the subject of my most recent book, Confessions of an Economic Hitman, third edition, China's Economic Hitman Strategy. Uh, but in addition, every major international corporation has its version of economic hitmen who are out
yeah,
there trying to convince countries that, we're going to build our next big industrial facility in Asia. And the economic hitmen will go to the Philippines, to Malaysia, to Indonesia, to Vietnam, and say, hey, we might build it here, but you're going to give us a really good tax. You're going to give us good tax breaks, no environmental regulations, and so on. So these economic hitmen will go out and put these countries at competition with each other. That's just one example. But so, yeah, so today it's gotten much worse. There's a lot more economic hitmen. They represent individual companies as well as governments. And the Chinese economic hitmen are doing a bang up job around the world.
yeah. I'm gonna have to. I was surprised by what you said about the connection between the economic system and shamanism, and I haven't read those books, so I'm gonna have to ask you some follow up questions on another day. But I'd like to ask, and excuse me if it's a naive question, but do you think behind that system that you just mentioned that there's a shamanism for the village where you visit? Is it the same with the billionaires, or is there some like spiritual element to the economic system as well um, that there's some dark energy that's behind it? Whether it's is there like a cult, or is it just a system that they use to get rich that's greed driven, or like what's the what's the connection between the shamanism and the economic system, like as far as what the tools of control that they use, like the economic hitman and the dealing with the big corporations and taking of resources.
Well, first of all, shamans are not about control. They're about helping people heal, sick people, hurt people. But to a lot of it has to do with changing their perception. And they're also about helping their communities heal. And yes, sometimes different communities will have two shamans that are competing and may go to war with each other, shamanic war with each other. And, that can be called black shamanism. But, in general, I think the shamans throughout the world have been a very valuable part of these cultures, and that they've helped the cultures move in directions that keep them healthy as communities and also as individuals. Not always successful by any means, and there's certainly bad, but there's bad ones amongst them too, like there is with in probably every profession. Um, but the connection is as I said earlier, I think it's about perception. So the shamans are teaching us perception. So in my particular case, was dying. I was in the Peace Corps. It was 1969. I was very, very sick. I couldn't keep any food down. I was deep in the jungle. Uh, I couldn't get out of my sleeping bag, which was on the floor of the dirt floor of this place. And I was dying and resigned to it because I was a 3 day trek through dense jungle and then a terrible bus ride up into the Andes to the nearest medical facility. I couldn't stand up. There's no way I could do that. And a shaman then offered to heal me. I'd never heard of shamanism at that point. That's not what I grew up with. And but I'm dying. What do you do? And so that night, he took me on this shamanic journey. And while I'm on this shamanic journey, I've got my eyes closed and I'm lying on this bench that they've put me on. And he says, "Touch the jaguar." And I'm in the middle of the jungle in the middle of the night. I open my eyes, I'm looking all around like, where the hell's the jaguar? Because I've heard them out there in the jungle. I've seen their tracks. I've never seen one, but I've seen their tracks. I've heard them. And I'm terrified. Like, where's it? No, no, no. He says, close your eyes, see a vision of the jaguar, and touch it. And I did. And as I did so, I heard my mother's voice saying, son, this food and drink will kill you. Now, in the Amazon, you don't drink water out of the rivers because the rivers they know they have organic
Yeah.
matter. It's not safe to drink river water. But they make a kind of beer called chicha by the women chewing manioc root and spitting it. And saliva works kind of like yeast. It sets up a fermentation process. And so this ferments into a kind of alcohol. Then you can add water to it, and they know it's safe because it's alcohol mixed with the water. So I'm drinking a lot of chicha because spit beer, because you got to rehydrate in the jungle a lot. And the foods they eat, squirming white grubs you pull out of a rotting log and down the hatch live, and all kinds of different foods that I was not accustomed to. And so I'm hearing my mother say, "Son, it'll kill you," because I realized that was my belief system that these foods, even though I had to eat them because there was nothing else, there were no Cliff Bars, there was no Perrier, So,
Yeah.
and at the same time, I saw in this vision how incredibly robust the Shuar, the people I was living with, are. The men, they kill wild boars in the forest and carry them a mile or two out on their shoulders. They're heavy animals. The men have legs that would make an Olympic soccer player jealous. And the women well, I was in my early 20s, so women were looking really good. And people lived to be very old if they didn't die of hunting accidents or whatever. And so I realized that night, and the next day, I'm feeling much better because I've had this vision that night. I've realized that the food and drink aren't killing me. It makes these people very robust.
Yeah.
It was my perception. And then the shaman kind of demanded that I become his apprentice and taught me about that. Like, yeah, it's all about perception. So touching the jaguar means whenever whenever there's something blocking you from being who you want to be, from doing what you most want to do, from being healthy. Often, there are diseases that don't, are not connected with, or accidents that aren't connected with perception. I don't mean to imply that, but in my particular case, it was to a very large degree about perception. And so the idea that when we change our perception, we change our reality. And of course, as I thought about it, that tied right in with my business education. I've been in business school. The marketing is all about perception.
Right.
Hey, if you don't buy a shirt like this, you're
Yeah.
you're never going to be successful, you know?
Yeah. Yeah, that's what you're doing with your spreadsheets. You're convincing these countries it was a perception. You have to convince them take these
Yeah,
loans,
yeah,
and then it's problem reaction solution. They can't pay it back, then you'll get the resources. It's
exactly. All about perception. And when you think about that's modern psychotherapy. That's quantum physics. That's
yeah.
science. That's our education system. How do we get people to perceive the things the way we want them to perceive? Countries are based on that.
Yeah, well, a lot of people are waking up. There's a big kind of alternative information movement, so that's got good momentum. I wanted to ask you one thing that I thought of while you're talking about the shaman situation. That's really life changing. That's an amazing story. I wish I had something like that happen in my life. Um, and
Well,
I'm sure a lot of
believe me, at the time it was happening, I did not wish it was
yeah,
happening.
of course, yeah,
Looking back, it's a great story, but at the time it was awful.
yeah, it's got to be scary being there.
Imagine being deep, deep, deep in the Amazon rainforest with people who you can hardly speak to. Uh,
Right? Yeah,
they speak a different, they don't even speak Spanish much. I spoke some Spanish, but at the time, I'm fluent now, but at the time I'd been taught Spanish for 8 weeks in a Peace Corps training camp. But 8 weeks doesn't teach you a hell of a lot. But then they speak schwa. Only the school teacher could speak Spanish. So here I am. It was terrifying. But yeah, in retrospect, it was a great experience. That's a
yeah,
perception. Again, what's your perception?
yeah. That's really cool. I've always felt that on Wall Street, there's two kinds of people. You've got the quants that have algorithmic strategies, and then you've got the I don't know what they're really called, but kind of like the more like a mafia approach where they control markets and I've always felt really dark energy, but I've never really explored that. And especially I'm more on the quant side, so I don't really have lots of contacts with that side of the street. But recently, Catherine Austin Fitts, have you heard of Catherine Austin Fitts?
I've heard of her. Yeah,
She's pretty good at doing the kind of macro analysis. She worked for
right.
the Bush administration, and she's connected some interesting dots. Like during the riots a few years ago, she found that all these buildings that burned down were all in special tax districts. So someone was actually paying people to cause riots that were destroying buildings, and not buildings across the street, only the ones in these special tax districts that
Mm.
people could come in. And it was the same entities that bought all these burnt down buildings for pennies on the dollar. Anyway, she's done some really great research, but recently she said something that the elites are controlled by interdimensional entities to a certain extent, like heavily influenced by them. What do you think about that? You think that that's nuts, or is it possible that
Well, it raises the question of where does the thought come from? My most recent book is you can only get it on digital. I kept it that way. It's called Message from Pleiades. It's a novel. It's the first novel I've written after, you know, 11 books on nonfiction. Um, and it really deals with this question. It takes place in Tikal and this ancient Mayan city in the jungle where I take people. My next trip is in March. It's coming March, and it it really raises this question: where does a thought come from? Where does an idea come from? You just asked me a question. Where did that question come from? Did it come from God? Did it come from an ET? Who knows? I mean, this is a profound question when you come right down to it. I was taken, one time when I was deep in the Amazon some years ago, staying in a Schwa house, this beautiful oval house with a thatch roof, really, really beautiful. There were 12, about 12 Schwa people living there, and I was spending some time there. And they get up very early in the morning before the sun rises. And we got up and I had a little transistor radio with me. So I put it in the middle of the lodge and turned it on, knowing that up in the top of the Andes there was a big radio station, big radio tower, and it broadcast this station called El Voz de los Andes, the voice of the Andes. It was an evangelical station, but it played at that early in the morning. It played this great Andean music, the panpipes, the drums. It was
Mhm.
really great music. I turn this on, it blasts out into this Shwa lodge, and everybody in that lodge runs off and hides in the forest.
Wow.
And I sat there, in front of this transistor radio. Eventually, the man of the house, who's a shaman and a warrior, known as a warrior, comes in and he's kind of embarrassed 'cause he's running and hidden, and I'm sitting there. He comes in with his spear and he goes up to the radio and he t taps it and it keeps playing. So he hits it a little harder, knocks it over. It keeps playing. So he sits down next to me. We sit there for a long time. And finally, he turns to me and he says, "Okay, tell me the secret. How did you get all those men and their instruments into that little tiny box?"
Yeah.
Because that was his only perception of how that could happen. And I explained to him, well, there's nobody in that box. There's this tower up there in the mountains, and it sends out these energy waves, and this box is able to receive them and convert them. And he looked, you're like, maybe you're crazy, this guy's nuts. Anyway, he calls everybody back into the house. He says, it's not dangerous here. Yeah, come on back in. But a day or two later, he comes up to me and he says, I've been thinking about that little box of yours, and it's just like us shamans. He says, we know everything we need, all the information we need for anything is right out there. All we got to do is reach up and grab those energy waves and use.
Yeah.
Wow. And it wasn't long after that, Joseph, that I was living in Florida. Took my infant daughter, young daughter, to the Thomas Edison Museum over on the west coast of Florida, where there's a lab that he set up over there, and it's all these, glass tubing, what you'd expect in a scientist lab. But then at the end, the guide says, "Now I want to show you the most important part of this laboratory." He takes us out and walks us down this corridor to this door, and he opens this door, and inside it's about the size of a broom closet with a cot. And he said Edison came in here every day for 20 to 30 minutes and took a nap. And he said that was the most important part of his day. Well, I read up on this, and Edison basically said what he did in there was meditate and get his ideas. And
Yeah.
he said something like, I didn't invent the light bulb. The idea was always out there. It just came to me, the idea, and then I had to conduct about 1,000 experiments to see what filament would work in a vacuum tube to make it happen. But the idea, I just reached up and grabbed it. And so your question, I'm just a long way of approaching that question. I don't know the answer, but who knows? Where are we getting? The Mayans believe that they came from Pleiades. That's this book, Message from Pleiades. And they still believe that they get, some of them, not all by any means, but some of them still believe that they get a lot of messages from their ancestors in Pleiades.
Yeah. Yeah, that's fantastic. I love that we're always downloading ideas from either the cosmos or from from we don't know, just something that universe is infinite. There's all this new things we're discovering, billions of galaxies and trillions of stars that it's just such a mass. Anything is possible in such a big
Yeah.
space, and that's just in the known universe.
And I love to write. And as a writer, I know my best writing, especially when I'm doing something like a novel, comes to me if I just open up to, inspiration, being in spirit, open up to the spirits, the voice. If but where does the idea for what we write about or what we speak about come from? It's a profound question, and no one knows the answer.
Yeah, but it's a practical answer, which is when you need inspiration, whether it's creativity or in business or you're an inventor, everyone can draw from that. So that's actually a really practical message in answering the question, because everybody can do it, and you don't need any technology, you don't need $1 million, you don't need anything. You just need stillness and focus and connect to what you want and manifest what you're trying to create.
Yeah. And now we've got AI. And where does that come from?
Right.
Where is AI getting its answers? I'm fascinated by AI. The most common one, I guess, is ChatGPT. And I don't use it to write what I write, but I will use it to do some of the editing. And
Yeah.
it can be quite brilliant. I'm amazed, like, whoa, how does it know what it is I want to say better than I know what I want to say? You know, it's fascinating what we're going through right now as a species. I think this may be part of our revolutionary process as tuning in to a new tool for tuning in, basically. I don't know, but this is a possibility that's in fact the case. I mean, if you think about the whole thing of tuning in, like just about everything that's ever been written by human beings and every song that's ever been sung is right here.
Yeah.
And it's picking up what's in this room. So with me right here, right now, the Beatles are here. Lady Gaga is here. Taylor Swift is here. They're all right here in this room. All I gotta do is reach up and grab them, and I can listen to them, or read Shakespeare is here. Uh, yeah, it's fascinating when you think about. So where does all that come from? How does that happen? And we don't know. We really, I don't think we know. I don't think the people who know the most about AI really know where that's coming from.
Yeah. Yeah. Just like authors a long time ago didn't know where they had their thoughts or ideas coming from. Yeah.
We still don't. We still
Yeah.
don't.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, that's really beautiful. So I appreciate you coming here, and it's great to talk to you. And where can people go if they want to go to Guatemala with you or get your latest books and see everything? Is it johnperkins.org?
That's it. Yeah. And all the information is there, and you can buy my books on, any of the online vendors or bookstores, except the most recent one, the Message from Pleiades is only digital, so you have to get that on an online vendor. But all the others are available in many different forms.
Yeah. I want to look up about what you said about the life versus the death economy, because I have a similar idea, but the way you explain it, it sounds more beautiful. It's because I'm looking at it from a technology and algorithmic perspective, but yeah, we need something that encourages life and not destruction and death and disease and all that.
Yeah, I
So
think I think the best source is my most recent Confessions book, which came out about a year and a half ago, the third edition of the trilogy. And there's an appendix that actually has a definition of the life economy and the death economy and many examples. So yeah, that's probably the best place. Yeah.
well, fantastic. We appreciate it, and I'll put all your links and information in the description so people can reach out and get your books. And we're very grateful. Namaste.
Thank you, Joseph. My pleasure. Namaste.
Have a great day. See you later.